Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 2, Jewel of the Endless Erg. Chapters 1 through 5, The Taste of Sand, The Moonless Owl, The Endless Erg, On the Nature of Crystals, and Shipboard Routines. In these chapters, our friends head out onto the Endless Erg in a sand ship. And poor Talia, she's really got it rough. Meanwhile, Hugh is his own worst enemy, as usual. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat. What's up, Dan? So we're starting a new book, and I'm very curious about something. I noticed that we've got different POVs within this section. And I am pretty into this. I don't know if this is going to be a thing that happens frequently, or if it's going to be simply dotted in here and there. But I am very, open to the idea of getting to see some of the, quote, sidekick characters getting a little bit more of a say and seeing their reaction to things. This is not a thing that I was expecting based on the first book, because usually if an author chooses a style and a point of view, they pretty much tend to stick with that unless they're doing something really big and different for major moments like a prologue and epilogue, or sometimes like an interlude between chapters kind of thing. And a lot of times those will be like all from the same other point of view, like they're just checking back in with one particular character. Like I've read a few murder mysteries where you get a prologue and interludes from the POV of the murderer. And you don't know who it is, but you get to see like what's going on with them and the things they're doing to kind of cover their tracks. This, though, is like just part of a regular chapter, jumping over, and we go to everybody. I think we go to Talia, and we go to Sabe, but we don't go to Godric yet. And yeah, I am very much a fan of this, because I think that, and this isn't necessarily always true, I'm fine with books that stay in the same POV the whole time. That's not always a bad thing. But if you're working on like a lot of world building, especially like with different types of magic, I think it's a fun thing to see the way that magic works for folks who have different skill sets, whose minds work differently, whose priorities are different. And then, of course, you've got the old standby, which is one of my favorite things, the difference in the way everyone sees the same event or situation. I've always been a fan of the trope, let's interview every witness, and then each witness tells a completely fucking different story because they each saw something different or interpreted something differently, or they're very prideful and trying to save face about something, or they are biased in favor of a certain person and making them look good. It's a big, like, one of my top 5 favorite tropes. I don't think that our POVs in this are the type of people who are so unreliable that they would be that extreme in terms of the difference of their situation and their point of view. But there is a certain like amount of history with each of them that would influence the way they see things. So, Ms. T says, agreed, this isn't Dresden where we are with the only wizard in Chicago. Yeah, and like the idea too of Hugh always being so unsure of himself and thinking that either he's a burden to his friends or that everybody thinks he's such a weirdo or whatever. it's really fun to go inside their heads and find out not only how untrue that is, but the ways in which they admire him that they don't necessarily always say out loud. And I'm very like, I'm ready for it, you know? So I'm personally kind of hoping that this remains an ongoing thing. But also, you can overdo it. You know, sometimes you can jump between too many POVs and it gets to be kind of ridiculous. I found that to be a little bit of a thing with the Witcher series, because you were jumping into the POV of characters that you otherwise barely saw from the outside, so you didn't really know who they were, and it was a very difficult thing to keep track of what was going on. But I like that we start the first book establishing who everybody is, and I get a very good sense of their personality. So by the time we get here and I'm going inside their head, I'm actually pretty unsurprised by what we find there. They are essentially who they look to be from the outside, which is a good sign, you know. Anyway, all right, let's start off, shall we? Hugh of Emblem was good at quite a few things. Oh wait, yes, this is so. I wanted to mention this. Hugh of Emblem was good at quite a few things, but he wasn't particularly good at running on sand, which was unfortunate because he really needed to be right now. I don't know if y'all recall, but the start of Into the Labyrinth begins with the sentence, Hugh of Emblem wasn't good at much, but he was very, very good at hiding, which was good because he really needed to be. So I kind of like that we're, you know, as much as that first sentence in the first book, I was like, that's not constructed super well. This is constructed much better, and I like that we're staying kind of on a little bit of a theme here with the way we're opening these books. So he's in training here with Candor and Crux, who is a lion and not a giant owl. Just thought I would remind everybody, myself, about that. And it turns out that later on, she is trying to get Hugh to realize he isn't able to do the thing that she's asking with the tools that he has. But he doesn't get there here. And what we find out is that not only is she like doing this thing that sets him up to fail, and like she's purposely doing this as part of the lesson, but she's also having him perform these exercises in front of his friends. And what the exercises are is that she is using the sand and turning it into like chunks of crystal and hurling them at him. And he has to sense the attack and dodge it using his affinity rather than his vision. There'd be no hint of them on the surface, so he had to find them before Candoron launched them out of the sand at him again. The biggest difference he'd felt after pacting with the Sphinx were his affinity senses. They allowed you to somehow feel whatever you were attuned to. Hugh had thought at first that this should easily allow him to detect the crystals Candoron was forming out of sand. Hugh, unfortunately, had never realized that sand seemed to be mostly made up of tiny crystals, so his senses almost entirely overwhelmed him each time he tried. And he's trying to, like, filter sort of the background noise out of what it is he's trying to sense, which are, like, the big chunks of crystal. They're fist-sized chunks of quartz, is how they are described, just slamming into his body repeatedly. Now, like I said, she's making him do this while his friends are sitting and doing some homework at a table under a umbrella nearby. And Candoron says a little humiliation makes the lessons sink in faster. Candoron was at least 5 centuries old, maybe even older for all Hugh knew, and her teaching methods were, unfortunately, nearly as out of date. Yeah, this is one of those things where I am going to have to deeply disagree with you, Candoron. I just, first of all, as somebody who has a lot of difficulty with coping with failure and getting rattled, I personally have had the experience of knowing I am absolutely capable of a thing, but fucking it up one time in front of people in a way that's significant and never ever being able to like get my shit back together again. And it is the worst because I know that's what's happening as it's happening. I can feel the fact that my repeated failures are a direct result of shame and embarrassment and an almost too desperate scramble that winds up like distracting my brain. So, just in that respect, Kandarin, you are very, very wrong, in my opinion. And then secondly, it's Hugh. I mean, enough said, right? Like, Hugh is the opposite of a person who learns well when being actively humiliated repeatedly. I just don't see the reasoning behind choosing this other than it being out of date. But I wish that anybody would be like, hey, you may want to reconsider your method here with like consideration to the actual personality of who you're teaching, because it just feels like a real losing battle and not in the way that she intends. So I just wanted to mention that because I feel a bit of a way about it. This here, and then the fact later that he is supposed to have realized that it can't be done and asked the question. The realization that it can't be done was kind of a fun, I don't know how many of you remember this moment in Cradle, but Lyndon asks for help learning to soulsmith from Fisher Gesha, and she gives him some like basic exercises, and rather than do what he's told, he tries to jump to the end of the exercise and present her with a finished product, and one of the things is incomplete. He manages to like do the finished product on everything except one, and it turns out she gave him something to do purposefully that was impossible, and he, in his over eagerness and a little bit of his vanity as well, failed to really comprehend the part of the lesson that was intended there. Hugh is not like Lyndon in that sense. So it takes him a little bit longer and he does have a moment where he feels like he wants to give up. And she has to straight up ask him, are you going to give up? Is that what you want to do? And it like I said, it's a close thing. He nearly says yes. But in the end, Hugh wants to keep trying because he's made this like contract with a being that is hugely powerful and just there's so much potential here. Don't fuck this up, Hugh. Don't do it. So anyway, let's see. Well done, Hugh. You managed to catch every single one of those crystals. That was your intent, I presume. Hugh just glowered at him. And Sabé says like that she wishes she could heal him, but she isn't allowed to do any more healing until she has a little bit more training. And Talia says Clan Castus only heals wounds from battles and accidents. How is training supposed to sink in properly if you don't live with the consequences? And there's a part of me that's like, shut up, Talia. And then there's a part of me that's like, ooh, that's not a bad policy. Like, I kind of see what she said, what she means by that, you know? So they are leaving for their little expedition tomorrow. Hugh readied himself to deal with the crowds. They hadn't bothered him quite so much a few weeks ago, but then a few weeks ago, no one recognized him when he walked around. So it turns out their little jaunt to the 6th level of the labyrinth has gotten out, and there's a lot of like wild rumors circulating. A lot of people are implying that this is not true, that of course, they couldn't all have survived if they went that far down. Probably things have been exaggerated. And, what I enjoy about that is the idea that, like, there's definitely some adults who went and scooped them up from the 5th level. So do you think that they're also lying? But I don't know where anybody is getting their information from. So who knows? Quite a few people thought the whole thing was exaggerated. Others had come up with stories about one of them finding some ancient and powerful magical weapon from the Ithonian Empire or the like. The fact that Hugh was now being tutored by Kandaron Crux really just served to fuel the rumors even further. And I'm like, look, I don't know about a weapon necessarily, but you did find that, like, labyrinth stone. So I don't know how wrong they are about that either. Sabé seemed to ignore the attention entirely, and Talia seemed to accept it as her due. But Hugh really hates it. And then we have Godric, and he had more muscle on him than any 3 other people Hugh knew. And he's pushing 7 feet tall. Godric shared his father's dark skin and curly hair, but he lacked the streaks of white running through the older man's hair. And I appreciate the reminder that Godric's black, because he is voiced with this extreme, like, there's almost like a Scottish lilt in the audiobook. And that's not to say that there aren't, like, black people in Scotland. But my mental image whenever I hear that kind of voice is like honestly, the mental image that I always come up with is the janitor from The Simpsons. So I keep sort of picturing like that. And so I was like, oh, right. I totally forgot. And thank you for that reminder. So, they go to the cafeteria and we get something that's really, really surprising here. First, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but they go to like pack up their stuff, and we get a little like list of everything that he has. Let's see, the journal of Sabé's great grandmother, a small enchanted glass sphere the size of a marble, which we know where he got those. He packed books, rope, sandals in case something happened to his boots. Very smart. And he doesn't make sure that it's like completely packed because he wants room to bring stuff back. And I was like, that's actually a pretty good idea and something that I personally never do. I always pack my shit to the point of bursting, and it's always a mistake, and I never learn, and then I always just do it again the next time. So we get a moment here. Hugh and the others turned to see Aiden Dragonslayer, one of the mightiest mages alive, striding through the crowd like it wasn't even there. Behind him was a tall, handsome, blonde youth that Hugh knew entirely too well. His chief bully over the last year, Rhodes Charax, nephew of the King of Highvale. And Rhodes looks miserable. The noble was staring at his master's feet as he walked behind him, not looking around him at all. Hugh doubted Rhodes even knew he was nearby. I heard Aiden's been less than pleased with Rhodes. He thinks Rhodes was cowardly for flying away rather than helping the lot of us. He's making Rhodes' life a living hell, training dawn to dusk. He should have stayed and continued his fight with us rather than fleeing. He wasn't afraid of us, Talia. He was afraid of whatever lurked in the depths of the labyrinth. Still a coward's act, Talia muttered. Hugh wasn't so sure. He couldn't stand Rhodes. But he thought Rhodes might not have done so well had he stayed. The demon Bakori had shown up almost immediately after Rhodes fled. And this is the kind of thing where I'm like, and, Hugh? So what if he wouldn't have done that well? I mean, y'all were maybe not going to do that well either. low key, we're all maybe gonna die. So like the point being, I don't care what happens to Rhodes, and I think he should have stayed because I was hoping something bad would happen to him. I appreciate that Hugh was a better person than me and trying to give this kid sort of the benefit of, not even the benefit of the doubt, but like allowing for the fact that, I don't know, I might have bailed too is kind of the vibe. But honestly, I'm on Talia's side with this. Just like, well, it was extremely cowardly. He just fucking left us there. And didn't tell teachers either. That's the thing that for me is really the main issue, is that he knew where they were, and the rules stated when they were like being spoken to before the whole labyrinth challenge began, that if you know there's a student who needs help, you don't pursue them into the next level, but you do go and find an instructor and you let them know where the student is so that they can send some people to help. And Rhodes didn't do that, and not only did he not do that, nobody expected him to do that because they knew he was a piece of shit that was not going to give a fuck if they lived or died. So personally, I am not only Team Talia here, but Team Aiden Dragonslayer, because I feel like if Rhodes had at least reported what happened, then he would have been doing his duty. It may not have been the bravest thing, but at least it would indicate that he gave a fuck about human life. But if he didn't report it, I mean, my question really is, had these kids never been found, would anybody on Rhodes's team have spoken up and said what happened? Because I've been kind of assuming that Rhodes was hoping to just get away with it, and all of his team were all going to keep quiet and just be like, well, I don't know what happened to them. And then privately be like, I know what happened to them, but they're dead. And nobody is ever going to find out about what happened. I was hoping that the other members on Rhodes's team, while, you know, obviously not great people because they're certainly willing to participate in the bullying, I was hoping that they would be like slightly less horrible than Rhodes, because leaving them there without reporting it is basically murder. You know, like at the very least murder too, or like manslaughter. If nobody was going to tell, wow, that is fucked up. So anyway, I'm over here just like thinking about all the potentials here, and I really like the fact that Rhodes is being put through hell and actually held to account for his choice in something. It's not the sort of thing that I get the feeling his family would ever have done, because he seems like such a complete spoiled, entitled brat that I am sort of operating under the assumption that he tends to get away with fucking anything. But all of this to say, fuck Rhodes. And I'm feeling a little bit better about Aiden Dragonslayer, because I'll be honest, the fact that he even chose Rhodes to begin with, I was side-eyeing him for quite heavily. And now I'm like, oh, maybe he truly didn't know what a little piece of shit Rhodes was. Or he was like, well, you can be kind of a shit, but as long as you have some, you know, rules that you follow, some codes of honor. And he's realized Rhodes doesn't even have that. Anyway, I'm sorry. So, the Moonless Owl is the ship that they are taking. And everybody had been sort of like wondering which one they were going to be on and choosing the ones that were their favorites. But they wind up on one that's sort of a barge. And it doesn't look as cool and sleek and interesting as the ones that they were getting excited about. And Alestin says, we couldn't ask for a better ship. We've been waiting as long as we have. To leave specifically for the Moonless Owl. I've chartered it just for us for this trip, although the crew will still be doing some trading at our stops. And Sabé is asking him where they're going. And we find out that he has been keeping from them where they're going basically the entire time that they have been in the building. And once they get out, he does tell them, but this only makes Sabe kind of feel like, okay, then nobody back at the school should, like, he didn't want them to know, and why not? Like, what's going on here? And I would also like to know why not. So this is when we meet this girl named Ava. And Hugh is smitten right away. Her hair stretched all the way down her back in a braid, far longer than her grandmother or the captain's. She was dressed similarly to the captain, trousers and a shirt that clung tightly at the neck, wrists, waist, and ankles, but billowed out elsewhere. She lacked the huge earrings of her grandmother, and she also might be the most beautiful girl Hugh had ever met. And it turns out that she sees Hugh as kind of a kid, and is a little bit insulting later, and immediately is into Godric, who does not reciprocate. And let's be perfectly honest, who wouldn't be into Godric? Even Hugh does not hold it against his friend. He's like, yeah, he's big and handsome and charming and smart and capable and like just, you know, very good with social stuff. And he's the guy that they all like copy their homework off of, as we found out. So he is an eligible bachelor. And I would be lying if I was saying that I didn't have like a tiny crush on Godric, even as I am aware he is a 16-year-old child. I do not picture him. I don't picture any of these characters as being quite as young as they are actually meant to be, because I tend to age up people to be more like close to my own age most of the time when I'm reading, unless they are really, really children, like, 11, 13 years old. So this girl being into Godric, I was like, girl, I get it. However, Godric is super not into her that way and seems to feel kind of bad about it. And I'm really curious whether that's because it's just she's not his type or there's no connection, or maybe Godric isn't straight, which would be interesting. I don't know what kind of representation there will be in this book regarding, other sexualities or genders or what, but I am open to it. So, we have rules. If a member of the crew orders you to do something, move out of the way, hold a rope, even jump off the side of the ship, you do so immediately. Second, you do not touch the ship's wheel for any reason. Third, and most importantly, do not accidentally destroy the ship while practicing magic. I know how you young mages are. And I love Hugh being like, well, I mean, and then he thinks of Talia and is like, all right, fair. So they talk with Ava a little bit about their attunements and abilities and stuff, and Talia is very suspicious and closely guards her own affinities. But when they kind of ask Ava why she's so free with telling people what hers are, she's like, well, I'm not a battle mage. I'm not worried about people taking advantage of what I can do and their information on me. We do business with people, and it's just a smart way to know who you're dealing with. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that there's just certain things that you're not going to be the same kind of paranoid about. And Hugh, when it comes his turn to explain, he gets totally tongue-tied, and Sabe has to step in and say that it's Crystal. And he's like, well, why didn't you mention the other two? And then remembers belatedly he is supposed to keep those secret. And I was sort of like, wow, Hugh, if you had been able to speak in this moment, would you have just given yourself away? Because you need to work on that, buddy. So they finally separate to go to their own places. Godric and Hugh have their own cabin together. You've been awful quiet, Hugh. Seeing Rhodes put you in a bad mood? A bit, I guess. That and, I'm still not the best at meeting new people. And he asks, who are the Rodians? Or Rodans. I think Rodans. Radhans. They're merchants and traders. They all live... I hate the fact that traders sounds like traitors. When you say it, like, it always just confuses me, auditorially speaking. They all live on their ships as families. And all the crew on board are probably related. Not just on the Endless Erg, either. Their ships range the ocean and rivers, too. They're a fairly private bunch, but nice enough. I've traveled with them before. And I just kind of like this moment of Godric and Hugh, like, talking about how they're feeling. Godric is wishing that his dad came to see him off, but apparently his dad has some bad luck with ships and he just doesn't want to go near them anymore, which I find a little fascinating. I'd like to hear more about that. So poor Talia. Here's the beginning of it. The whole ship shuddered. What was that? Talia asked. We're getting out of the lee of the mountains, Sabé said. The terrain is going to get a lot bumpier as we start crossing actual dunes. Talia looked around uncomfortably at the gently rolling sand. These aren't actual dunes? In the depths of the Erg, many dunes can grow to a couple 100 feet in height. Talia's face paled a little bit. We'll be avoiding dunes that big, right? No idea, Sabé said. Talia turned to Hugh, but he just shrugged. He'd only taken one trip in a SandShip before. We'll likely be going through many of the larger dune fields, Aliston said. Our first destination is Therastel, the fabled jewel of the Endless Erg. And this is the first time that they have found out where they're going. Don't get too excited. We're still a week of travel away. And we've got a lot of dunes to cross first and a lot of training to do. And they're all just like, oh, they were sort of thinking that maybe they would get a bit of time off. And they're given some tasks, and we get some detailing here about the first task, which is to levitate an object. And it's a simple, like, on the surface sort of task, but because they are in motion as they're trying to levitate something, there are a lot of additional factors to, take into account. And Sabé was forced to not use an actual levitation spell at all. Instead, she was forced to hold up a metal sphere using her wind armor, which consisted of her channeling her mana to rapidly rotate wind around her limbs. In order to keep the metal sphere from being sent flying, she had to apply equal force to each side, as well as force the wind to rotate in different directions around each hand. Can I just tell you that just reading that tired me out? Like, that's too much. And I'm not going to get into every single thing, but suffice to say, they all have their work cut out for them. And they are all struggling. The one who is doing the worst here, though, because of her sand sickness, sea sickness, is Talia. She is vomiting copiously. Anytime anyone tries to get near her, she basically growls at them and shoves them off. And I'm like, personally, yeah, I don't know about y'all, but I don't want anyone near me when I'm vomiting. For so many reasons. One, I don't want to worry about getting vomit on them. Two, vomiting is undignified and embarrassing. Three, vomiting stinks and is gross, and I don't want anyone to have to deal with that. As the person vomiting, I don't want to be dealing with this. I don't need them there. And four, I just don't like anyone hovering over me when I'm not feeling well in general, because there's always a sense in my mind that I have to sort of manage their emotions and their response to me being sick, which feels like more labor that I just don't feel like dealing with. So there's just, the way it's written is just like, oh, she just doesn't want company. And I'm like, fucking, of course she doesn't. And then we get the dinner and they are all having curry. Y'all, can I just tell you guys how jealous I was? Curry is truly the only food that matters. And you can quote me on that. I adore food of all kinds. There's just nothing quite like curry, man. It's the fucking best. And anytime that I read about anyone eating it, a craving develops that doesn't leave me for like days after, because it is just, ugh. So this is when Sabe brings up the fact that like, it's weird that Alustin wouldn't tell us our destination until we like got on the road. And then she says, I'm wondering if maybe he is on a mission for Kandarin. That's one rare book. If Alustin wants to keep things secret, I wonder what it could be. And Sabe just smiled and took a bite of her food. I think Sabe knows more than she's saying. What do you think? Just a vibe. So Godric eats like 3 bowls. The cook seems quite pleased, actually. They bring Talia a bowl of food, hoping that it will help settle her stomach. You know everything I said about curry, guys? I fucking stand by it. But you know what's going to do the opposite of settle a person's stomach? Fucking curry. Oh my God. And I know they mean well. And I know that there's probably not a box of saltines and ginger ale available. But, yo, kids, no, not the thing. And she does like it, you know? She's like eating it and feeling like, oh, this is really good. But, yeah, it's not the answer. So this is when Ava turns up. Some folks' stomachs just aren't tough enough to handle ship life. Wow, that was really hard to say, guys. And this pretty much got me like not liking Ava right from like this moment. And then the way that she talks about Hugh a few minutes later, and I was fully off of the Ava train. I'm just going to be honest. It's just, she is so, the superiority with which she talks about some people's stomachs just aren't tough enough. I'm like, you, like, if you knew anything about Talia, accusing her of not being tough would never enter your fucking mind. And there's just a snideness to it. And then later, she's like, all right, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We hear about these creatures that are, they look like leaves almost, that are like flapping. And apparently they are called sunlings. They are the foundation of the Erg's ecosystem. Most animals that live in the Endless Erg either prey on the sunlings or prey on the things that eat them. Even in a harsh environment like this, life can find a way to thrive so long as it has the means to do so. A food source is one of the most critical. The sunlings don't just derive nourishment from sunlight, they also get it from the ether as well. One of the only known species to do that directly. No matter where you go, you'll find something on the bottom of the food chain, and it will always be the most common life form around. And when Hugh asks what as at the bottom of the food chain in the labyrinth, they get interrupted before Alustin can reply, and I'm very concerned that the reply was going to be human beings. So fingers crossed that it's not human beings. They get interrupted by a call to arms because something is above them. Very, very large and above them. And Hugh immediately knows that it's Kandarin. So he says to Alustin it's Kandarin, and Alustin looks and says, so it is, and tells the guys on the ship to stand down, put away those weapons. And it didn't occur to me that maybe this was like a fucked up thing for him to do. But Captain Salon comes over and is like, hey, bruh, I appreciate that you are on our good side and you're giving us some work right now and all of that. But There is something unknown in the air coming at us. You don't get to give orders on my ship. And I was like, you know what? You're right. The whole thing the main rule about taking this ship to begin with was do what the crew tells you. So I feel like don't give the crew orders is also a probably good rule of thumb. And Alliston says Hugh here has better eyes than your lookout. That unknown threat is Kandarin Crux. She happens to be a multi-century-old Sphinx archmage, bigger than this entire ship, who can shrug off your ballista bolts like they were nothing. I strongly suggest you follow my advice. And personally, I was like, okay, I'm not saying that you're wrong about who it is and how to handle it, but I do want you to kind of respect Captain Salon's point here a little bit more, Alliston. That's all I'm saying. He just always has to he's just a drama queen. It's fine. And then Godric says, how can you make any details out this far away? And Hugh says, I saw blue glinting off her wings. That's your proof? Ava said. There are plenty of dragons out there with blue wings. That doesn't prove anything. Hugh flushed and looked down at the deck. No one has wings like Kandarin, Sabé said. It seems awfully convenient that you have ballista that can fire upwards, Talia said. Most of the predators of the Endless Erg fly, Alliston said. Hold on a minute. And she says this, and Alliston interrupts. It's the most sensible way to get around in a desert like this. Moving around on foot is a good way to exhaust yourself in this sand. And Ava started again, but they're talking over her. Finally, we can't risk the ship on the word of some random kid, Ava said. Hugh flushed. He was older than she was. Talia looked like she was ready to fight Ava, but Alliston interrupted. That's Kandarin, all right. Hugh, without looking at Ava, vaulted over the edge of the ship. And what I wanted was for this moment where he vaults over the edge of the ship and then lands with his spell that he constructs in his mind. I wanted Ava to eat her words and see that Hugh is somewhat gifted. I don't get that satisfaction, sadly, which is fine. It would be a little bit too perfect, fair. You know what I'm saying? There are moments where I'm like, that was very satisfying. And then there are moments where it's almost goofy how completely the good guy gets to get his own back. So I'm not mad that he doesn't, but I was hoping. And Talia remains mad on Hugh's behalf for the rest of this section of chapter so far because of the way Ava talked about him. Hugh, for his part, is just sort of humiliated because of the way she talked about him, that he avoids her. And also, it's just so clear she's very into Godric, that he doesn't really want to insert himself into the situation because I don't think he realizes that Godric isn't particularly into her. When we go to a scene of the two of them hanging out inside the cabin, he thinks that Godric is just chilling inside with him to be nice. And he doesn't realize that Godric would be here anyway because he's avoiding Ava. And he thinks that Hugh is hiding to keep him company, which is very cute. But this moment with her just first of all, some stomachs aren't strong enough. And then here just being some random kid. Bitch, random kid? Even setting aside the fact that he is older than you. He may not look older than you, so whatever. But setting that aside, this man, Alliston, has brought a group that he has chosen to take on as apprentices with him. that is not random. And that's not to say that she necessarily knows what any of them are good at or why he chose them or anything like that. But, you know, this isn't some like huge crowd of people and just a voice out in the distance yells, "That's Calderon." This is a kid who is like here with one other person who has probably encountered Calderon long enough to know from far away what she looks like. And that one other person looks at the sky and says, "Oh yeah, that is her." Girl, go sit down. What are you talking about? It's not just one random kid. It's a kid who is very specifically picked to be here, and his mentor who knows what the fuck he's talking about, and you should assume he knows. So, what I'm saying is, Ava is going to need to work to get me back on her good side, because the only thing that we get further with her is a sort of like reconciliation later when she finds out that Hugh doesn't hate her, but she thought he did because of the way he was ignoring her. And I just need her to, I don't know, just like, I think what's probably happening here in large part is that these are landlubbers up in her space that she's like lives on and is very familiar with. And it just kind of feels like they're being presumptuous, maybe sometimes. And that I understand, but also get a hold of yourself. So we have a lesson here with Calderon again. And I just can't tell you, I didn't really think that we were going to just get pelted with crystals more. I thought Calderon was out here, I don't know, maybe to like touch base with Alliston and they would talk about whatever mission he's on or something. No, it's just like more of him getting hit with crystals. And I just felt really bad for Hugh because I thought at least if he keeps getting homework from Alliston, it's not going to be the same type of punishment. And it turns out there is no escape. So this is when we jump to Talia's POV. And she's feeling better, but still not doing great. Hugh was doing terribly as usual. Talia was fairly sure that he was somehow managing to sabotage himself again. That boy was his own worst enemy. She didn't understand him. One minute he could be displaying his genius with his wards or his quick reactions to danger. The next he would withdraw straight back into himself. He'd improved a lot since Talia had first met him, but he still had a long way to go. He regularly went days without talking to anyone but his small group of friends and teachers. And this is the kind of thing where I'm like, I understand that it's not hugely helpful that he meets a stranger and he simply can't speak to them. Like, you do need to get to a point where you can engage in some basic small talk without totally clamming up. However, he like would go days without talking to anyone but his small group of friends and teachers. Bitch, so? That's fine. Like, same. Whatever. Not everybody needs to be outgoing, is all I'm saying. Talia is seeing this is like a flat out disability in a lot of ways. And I'm like, look, you can want him to be slightly better socially, but he's never going to be the queen bee type. You know, he isn't just not a social butterfly, and that's fine. So, and we also get a bit of her being like, I wish I could meet the family that treated him like this because I would beat the shit out of them. And I was thinking, yes, girl, yes. I have a few friends who have been treated away by people in their lives and have frequently felt like they better hope they never come face to face with me because I am going to let them have it. So we go back to Hugh, and this is when we get the lesson about the crystals. And he says, I can't tell the difference between the sand and the crystal. It's like they're the same thing to my senses. Maybe I'm just not cut out for a crystal affinity. And this is when she asks if he wants to quit, and he says no. It's about time you realize the problem. You've been unable to sense the crystals because they are the same as the sand around them. And then how am I supposed to detect them if they're made of the same material? Well, trying to detect them that way would be a waste of your time. Now you need to learn what a crystal actually is. They are patterns. The internal structure of every crystal is made up of countless repeated patterns that mimic the crystal on a larger level, which then in turn repeats on smaller levels. So then we get a quote that's been highlighted like 300 times when he's like, why didn't you just explain that? Failure is an important part of the learning process. You humans seldom value knowledge until you understand its necessity. True, to a point. But again, I just feel like Calderon doesn't seem to really get who Hugh is and like the best way to teach him. And I think that if she had explained, his is the type of mind that would immediately grasp what a disadvantage it would be to try and sense them the way he was attempting this whole time. I'm just saying. So what she's saying is basically, don't try and sense the material. Sense the patterns within the material. And she explains about like being able to change up the patterns and like make things out of them. And the fact that there are lots of things that are made of crystals technically that are not actually like rock exactly. And points out not all stones have it actually. Obsidian doesn't. Nor does any other glass. And we find out that there are glass mages. And I was like, that sounds dope as hell. Amber, opal, pearl, jet, and a few others lack crystalline structures, each for their own reasons. There are also many crystals found outside of stone, ice, and you can also find crystals in living beings. The shells of clams are crystalline. And she tells him to hold out his hands, and she puts a pair of manacles on him, basically. The crystal slowly expanded until it completely sheathed both wrists, and then began to thin, narrowing into thinner and thinner spindles until it seemed to flow apart completely into the two thick bands of clear crystal around his wrists. And she says, all done, and sort of like lets go, magically speaking, and he almost falls over because they are so heavy. And she says those are made of ether crystals, mana made solid. These bracelets are going to keep growing in weight and in size until you master them. Not quickly, perhaps a pound a day, but steadily. Consider it an important part of your training. I can't be flying out every day to train you, and Alestin is capable of helping you with much of what you need, but these will provide the rest. You're going to have to practice continually at holding up the weight using your attunement. A simple levitation spell won't do. The patterns inside the crystal will interfere. You have to use your affinity senses and adapt spell forms specifically for the crystal. And when he's like, okay, and how long do I have? Like, when do they get taken off? She's like, oh, I see the misunderstanding. No, you don't take them off. This is just going to be a thing that you have on forever. And she says this crystal will gain something of a life of its own as it grows with you. Others have fashioned theirs into swords, crowns, and more. So what I'm hearing is that this is almost like a gold sign. Another cradle reference. But they are like the other thing that I'm sort of thinking of with these, it's like magical weight training, and it's like physical weight training as well, to be fair. But you know what I'm saying? Like trying to manage something a little bit every day until the load of it becomes sort of easier to bear. They are a single crystal. Each ether crystal is unique in its underlying pattern. That pattern is what defines the crystal as a single unit. They're incredibly rare and largely found only in the depths of labyrinths and other places of highly dense ether. Eventually, you'll need to fully attune them to yourself. Doing so requires you to channel an absolutely immense amount of mana through them, more than you can count on anywhere but in the densest ether fields, as in the lower levels of Skyhold's labyrinth. Since it's too dangerous for you to return down there so long as Bakori lurks there, we'll likely have to send you down into another labyrinth. The Gorgons are usually more approachable. And I was like, the what? Don't care for that. So, then we go to chapter 5. And it's a lot about the routines of being on the ship here. And he is like managing a little bit better, but he also feels a bit of a way because he's managing better. But it also seems like Canderon isn't really like focused that much on challenging him. So maybe he's only doing better because she's kind of half-assing it. And they all like, when he gets back on the ship, a lot of people want to ask him about his training and, you know, what's going on, who that creature is, and probably want to ask him about his affinities and stuff. He climbs into a bunk and falls asleep. And then we get a little bit of the overall like routine with all of them having their own individual trainings. Then they get a bit of a break, sort of like midday. And there's a suggestion that probably those breaks are for Talia's benefit because she's still not doing great in terms of like the seasickness. Hugh suspected the physical training breaks were in large part for Talia. Of course, the longer this went on, the more bad-tempered Talia became. And we get a bit of a check-in with everybody and how they're doing with their attunements. But Godric is the one that's doing the best. It turned out there was a good amount of overlap between stone and sand masteries, so Godric was able to learn to do a few neat tricks with sand. His favorite was turning sand into sandstone, which he mostly used to get better footing in the sand. It took considerable effort to make the change permanent, but even temporarily shifting it to sandstone was good enough for Godric's purposes. And I was like, that is actually like really cool. To just it be basically like you're walking on solid ground while everybody else is in regular sand. Dope. Sabe, not doing awesome. And it turns out that she's trying to like deal with a water affinity and she's in the desert, and that's just not as it's just not very conducive, unsurprisingly. But fucking Alestin is like, of course there's not a lot of water out here, which means that if you get good at it out here, you'll be able to fucking do it anywhere. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, you're right, but also, for God's sake, give her a break, man. And Hugh is struggling a bit with his bracelets, and the weight of them is tiring him out. The spell forms with the movement, with dealing with like the crystal thing, it's all a lot for him to keep track of. And this is all on top of the fact that he is extremely embarrassed to fail in front of Ava, which happens quite a lot. And he hadn't spoken to her since Canderon showed up. So then, understandably, she thinks that he hates her. And I'm like, well, girl, maybe you shouldn't have been a dick. This is when we get Sabe storming into the room. And Sabe is like, what is your deal, you and Godric, hiding down here? And Godric admits he doesn't want to see Ava. And Hugh doesn't say he has a crush. Sabe opens it, like, she sees his face when Talia claims he hates her. And he says, what? I don't hate her. And Sabe is like, oh, you have a crush. Talia says, why? She's no warrior, and she's not that pretty. And I was like, I really hope that we're not getting a, like, jealous Talia here. Because I don't want to see it. I would be fine with her having a crush on Hugh. And to be fair, with her personality, jealousy feels in character. But I would like it if we don't do that. And here we find out that the thing that she said about Candorum was like a week ago at this point. And I was like, yeah, okay, a week on this small ship, not speaking to a person, that feels like a pretty long time. You do need to kind of figure this out, man. So she manages to like pull them out and get Hugh and Ava talking. And it takes a little bit, but she's feeling a bit smug about it. Sabe was pretty sure neither Hugh nor Ava noticed that she'd manipulated them into moving past that part quickly and into a conversation about the similarities and differences between sand and crystal affinities. Sabe had some doubts as to whether there was any romance to be found there, but at least she had ended Hugh's moping. More than an adequate repayment for getting past the awkwardness. And I love this line. Talia, on the other hand, was about as complicated as a hammer to the face. Prideful and angry, with a chip on her shoulder bigger than her entire body, but loyal to a fault. I really did like that. Just as complicated as a hammer to the face. I mean, that's like, it feels like an insult, but it's not exactly. It's just a fucking fact, you know? And I really do enjoy that the cook kind of gives Sabe a bit of a knowing look over the fact that she managed to get them out of their shells and talking to each other. And then Alustin pops up and is like, oh, hey, you got everybody up on the deck. Nice. I thought I'd have to take care of that myself. I wasn't really looking forward to spending the time doing that since we're about to be attacked by pirates. Sabe gave Alustin a disbelieving look. Alustin merely smiled wider. Well, at least this should cheer up Talia. And I thought that was a really good last line of the chapter. I laughed out loud with that because, yeah, Talia is just going to be like, what? Fight? Physical fight? Probably standing still for a bit? Yeah, I like it. McShard says, Candorum's perspective is interesting to try and imagine with her being centuries old and not human. I love the clever uses of affinity magic in this series. Yeah, I am finding the magic and the way that it works based on like molecular structure and physics to be really interesting. Alustin is a very challenging teacher. Oh my God. McShard says, Sabe storming in because she's a storm mage. You shut up. Get out of here. Dan says, cooks always know everything. You know, the kitchen is the heart of any household. Whether you're on a ship, it's still a household. And it makes sense that you're in a place where people are going to like loosen up and talk. You're going to see their behaviors and the way they interact with each other. And yeah, you're going to pick up some fucking gossip, man. You're going to know what's going on. Makes sense. So I'm over time and I better wrap this up. But yeah, we're off to a good start. Very interested. Looking forward to finding out more about Godric too, because Sabe is like, he's a little hard to figure out actually. And I enjoy that Godric is, you know, as much as he has this sort of brute strength aspect to him and his size, it would be easy to make him the one that's as complicated as a hammer to the face. But instead, he's got some layers and I want to peel them back. It sounded really sexual. I didn't mean it that way, but you know. Anyway, all right, guys. Thank you so much. And I will be seeing you Tuesday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.